Jazz Forward is a new live music agency. Established musicians and multi-instrumentalists Marianne McGregor, Malcolm MacFarlane and Sophie Bancroft, along with music journalist Fiona McTaggart, have come together to showcase some of the exciting original music and diverse musical talent to be found in Scottish jazz. Jazz Forward is funded by Creative Scotland. Episode 4. What is your creative process?
I mean, I see what I do as not so much journalism, as I think we've spoken about before briefly, as just supporting people, because I think myself, but I'd say a lot of Scots are particularly low in confidence and self-esteem, and that includes their productivity, what they do and how good their work is. And I guess I feel that that's actually illogical, that that a lot of Scottish creatives are amazingly skilled and talented and produce world level music.
Yeah.
And I guess I would see myself as someone who's kind of championing them. And if I sound over the top at times and what I'm writing or saying, it's probably unconsciously, I don't do this consciously, but it's probably to try and rectify that imbalance that I see sort of around me just about everywhere. There's very few overconfident musicians who are so sure of themselves that they just think they're the bee's knees. And, there's very little of that about, really.
Yeah.
And if people appear like that, it's often just superficial, part of the performance.
Yeah.
And at core, they're really not too sure of themselves and their output. So I guess it's about that, really, from my point of view.
I mean, I think it's also interesting because I think, the offshoot of that lack of confidence you're talking about amongst everybody, but, amongst the wider community of creatives in Scotland, I think also then, in my experience anyway, transpires to being that people are not very good at nurturing each other and supporting each other and holding each other up. So there's a real sort of holding in of going, hey, that's great what you've done, or certainly there used to be, which I think is from the individual's lack of confidence, therefore not being able to say it to other people so freely. I feel that's changing now, actually, which is great.
Right.
But having someone like you doing what you're doing is very helpful for that.
Well, I would also say that you are extremely nurturing in your approach, and I've seen it time and time again since we started Jazz Forward and we got to know each other a little bit, that's a real strength that you've got. And I don't know if you do it mindfully and consciously, or if it's an unconscious thing that's just the way you are. It's a mixture, perhaps, but you're extremely nurturing.
I think as a teacher, I've always like you as a writer, I've always focused on people's positives. And I think that's probably partly a reaction to the fact that I didn't receive that when I was developing, and realise in hindsight that my shaping would have been a lot easier if people had focused on my positives. But that's just maybe then I wouldn't have been able to write about difficult stuff. So that you can't change all of that. But I think I that's definitely a conscious thing of mine. I'm a great believer in focusing in on the positives to bring out.
And that's interesting, isn't it, that you've kind of gone into that way of teaching, because there's many different styles of teaching, obviously, and you often find that, I think, just looking around, you see people who have entered jobs that do sort of help in an area that they feel there was a deficit in their own past. So, I mean, that must be quite satisfying, I would have thought, to be kind of rectifying that, if not for yourself, but for everyone that you come in contact with.
Yeah. No, well, definitely. And it's just much a nicer way of being, I find, isn't it, really, looking at the positive.
Well, in Scotland, I think there's plenty, like I said before, we knock each other and we knock ourselves. And I'm glad to hear you say that you see that that's changing. That's great. I'm really pleased if that's starting, because we should have more confidence. There's just such a lot of, as I say, exceptional people in Scotland. And to be honest, I would argue that everyone has something special about them. I don't think I've ever met anyone in any domain in life, whether it's music or elsewhere, who hasn't got a lot to offer.
Yeah.
It is about the encouragement, and also about them realizing what they've got. So
Sure.
we should be
Yeah.
more confident, I think, all of us, and
Yeah.
at a deep level, because
Well, I think
everybody should
that's
be
what's
like that.
interesting about Jazz Forward, isn't it? Is because we're kind of coming together and doing that in a way,
Yeah.
increasing the
hmm
confidence of all of us because of the team in
Uh-huh.
that sense, which is
Yeah, and being very
great.
positive as well, because I think
Yeah,
we've all said that we want to. It's been a really difficult 2, 3 years, what with
yeah,
COVID and all, and so it's about just saying yes, okay, this is there, and there's still elements of difficulties going on, obviously, but we're going to be positive. We're going to look to the future and a kind of with brightness, and not be dragged down by all of this
yeah.
more than is absolutely necessary. I think that's a really good strand of Jazz Forward, that positivity.
So when you're writing, when you're composing, what's your process? How do you go about it?
I don't really have one process. I mean, it's kind of, it depends what I'm doing, because I quite like. I mean, in fact, I was having a rehearsal the other day with Ross Milligan, and a couple of the tunes of mine that we were working on, I hadn't even written them down. They just kind of things that I'd kind of made up and just recorded, so I didn't, kind of forget them. But then I kind of played them quite a lot, um, so they're kind of quite kind of intuitive, and I mean these are kind of short form kind of song type things. So I'll quite happily do that, and not compose in the kind of in the written sense. Just kind of come up with ideas and kind of feel my way through it for some things. But then for other things, like for larger scale things, then I will put my kind of uh, kind of composer hat on, and actually work more um, rigorously with ideas and themes and motifs and all the rest of it, and do that from a scoring point of view.
Okay.
Um,
Are you a pencil and manuscript person or a
a bit
software?
a bit of both, really. I mean, the
Right.
software is great, but it can be a little bit tail wagging the dog, because
Yeah.
once you've entered something into Sibelius, if you want to radically change it, it can be a pain. I mean, there are
Yes.
some things in there that are really easy, and it's a fantastic program. But also there is that thing that once it's written down, if you've got a passage that's in 4/4, and all of a sudden you want to change it to 7/8 or something like that, it's a real pain to go through and
Yeah.
that, for example.
Yeah.
So I do a kind of combination. I do uh, some stuff on manuscript, and then some stuff on score paper, and then some stuff in Sibelius. So there isn't really one way of doing it, but I mean Sibelius is great for you can work very quickly on it, and it is a great tool. But yeah, there's a lot to be said for just thinking of things and writing them. If you write them down, you can have bits, and then you can kind of order those bits and turn them into something before you kind of commit to say, all right, this is the final version.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
No, I'm definitely a pencil and rubber girl.
yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, well, the rubber gets used an awful lot
Yeah,
around
so
here.
does mine.
And editing, that like the last piece that I wrote. I mean, I overwrote. I mean, in terms of sheer length, like
Yeah.
massively. So that kind of edit. So having Sibelius to edit something down and kind of hopefully chop out all the unnecessary things, or make things more concise and make things more to the point is quite good as well.
Yes.
So
Yeah. It's interesting, and certainly within a song and as a singer, it's nailing that sort of middle ground of how you deliver time wise the melody. Sibelius is really useful for that, isn't it? Because you've got to you've got to find a way, decide what note value you're using.
Yeah.
And that's quite a process. I think people don't realize how much of a process that is. It's finding the middle ground, isn't it? That everybody can walk on, and then they can step off it as they wish, but it has to be nailed in that written melody.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, because I find a lot of the time when you're working with people who are improvising, whether they're instrumentalists or singers, it's actually that thing that having a written version of a melody gives you the essence of what, not the ideal is, but what the kind of the bare bones of it are, and then you can vary it, but
That's right,
don't start with the variations, and but make sure you know what the thing is first, in its essential form before you start.
No, it's fascinating stuff, all of that. And I mean, melody for me is one of my most favourite focuses, or deciding exactly what that middle ground is going to be. And then, I mean, I never sing it like that, but it's because it's different every bloody time. But it's like that, just nailing that middle ground.
And a bird sings out a melody to the green. She's calling me to get ready for.
When you write, do you have a process that happens each time, or does it change, or what's your creative process?
There's usually just two different processes that happen randomly. Either I will be feeling more inspired by words and I'll do some lyric writing, or like sometimes if I'm on a train or something, I'll write lyrics just off the cuff in my notes on my phone, or I'll do some free writing just with a pad and a pen, and usually just set myself the task of free writing for a couple of minutes, and then you find the odd little bit where you're like, oh, there might be something there. And that's how it would start off sometimes. Or sometimes I'll kind of just be walking around the house singing, and then I'll come up with a little phrase. And again, also on my phone, on my voice notes, I just record little snippets of things. And then usually at a later date, I'll take that one phrase that I wrote that I liked, or that little voice note where I sang a melody, and I'll try and see if any of it pieces together.
Okay. So do you tend to work lyrics first?
Most of the time, I would say so.
Okay.
And then once I've got an idea for either a lyric or concept that I like, or some sort of melody that I like, I'll sit and try and figure chords around it and experiment.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a question. I don't know if you're the same, but it's a question I get asked so often. What do you write first, the music or the lyrics? For me, it used to be the music first, and then the lyrics. And actually, I find now I start more often with lyrics. And then very occasionally, the whole thing just writes itself, which
definitely.
At the same time, that's always the best.
Sometimes,
the best ones are like that, aren't they, somehow?
Yeah, sometimes they can all come at once, and usually those are the best tunes as well. I don't know if it's because those ones are most likely about something that was happening right then and there.
Yeah.
Whereas the other method is maybe slightly more reflective.
Yeah.
I don't know, both are good.
I think it depends on the song, doesn't it?
Yeah, it depends on the song. And it depends what it's about, how you feel about it.
And do you? I find sometimes it's kind of like feeling there's a bubbling coming up in me, or something that I need. It's a feeling that I recognise. I need to go and sit down and with a piece of manuscript and pencil and write. Do you have anything like that? An awareness that something's wanting to come out, to be written?
Yeah, I think that has happened a couple of times. I always say that you can't really force songwriting. You can't schedule it in, like, today from 5 till 6 I'm going to do songwriting. Like, I think it is about how you're feeling at the time, and if you're feeling inspired, or if something terrible is happening and that inspires you to try and let something out in a song. So I just do it whenever I feel it coming on.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I mean, that's where it's so important to have that balance in life where you've got the space, isn't it? We've talked about that before a bit, haven't we, with balancing out teaching and creativity and ensuring there's enough space to allow that.
Definitely.
In a dark room I may cry for hidden possibilities that now pass me by, and an overwhelming love of those I hold so dear and those long gone, but very much still here.
When I write, I actually use both instruments. I have both piano and guitar, and I go back and forwards, because I find with piano, because it is so clear to see, that I get overly complicated. Whereas with guitar, because I can't see it metaphorically as well as literally, it keeps me simpler, which I think is better for my writing. And then sometimes I can't find what I want on the guitar, so that's when I go to piano, and then I transfer it back to guitar once I found it on piano. It's interesting. They are such, and yeah, I agree absolutely. It's that visual thing is so different.
I think it's kind of like, well, I should probably do a bit more of what you're saying when you write and you sort of translate it for piano and translate it for guitar, and you can probably hear different things and maybe it takes you in a different direction.
Yeah.
But for guitar, like, I find that the same chord can sound so different, even if you just play it on a different instrument. So that's partly why I want to play a bit more guitar. Also, people keep giving them to me. I've got like 5 guitars in my house.
Oh wow! So the universe is telling you.
Yeah, but it's kind of awkward because I don't really play. People come over, they're like, "Oh, you're really into the guitar." I'm like, "No." Somebody teach me.
This podcast features excerpts of music written by Sophie Bancroft, Malcolm MacFarlane and Marianne McGregor. You can find more information about Jazz Forward at jazzforward.scot.